Apparently, homeopathy is not known really in this country. It's a very specific German practice. It's called, well, most people think it's a pseudoscience. I'll discuss it shortly. I'm not prepared yet to talk about traditional Chinese medicine. I don't know enough about it. But I talk about pseudoscience, finally a conclusion. So I started about medical science, and interestingly enough, from my discussions with people in the medical profession, I learned that there are sometimes confusions regarding medical science and medical practice, which seems to a philosopher a fairly clear distinction. It's not that clear when you talk to professors of medicine. And I hope to establish some clarity by making some distinctions regarding medical science versus medical practice, then different types of medical practice, and then different types of medical science. So you get a sort of orientation what's going on in the medical field concerning practice and science. So first, the distinction between medical science and medical practice. And that distinction concerns the aims of actions within medicine. Right? When you act in medicine, then you can have different purposes or different aims. And first, medical science that concerns action that aim at the increase, test, etc. of medical knowledge. So they refer to medical knowledge and its increase and test. And medical practice is actions that aim at diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of diseases and other conditions. Medical conditions is the technical term for all sorts of things where medical interventions are necessary. And it is very misleading, as some people in Western medicine in Europe do, to call medical practice a part of medical science. This has some political background because they want to push back pseudoscience and other forms of practice, and therefore they call it medical practice a part of medical science, which I find is misleading. And the connection between these two areas is that medical practice can be based on medical science, but this alone does not make it a part of medical science. It has a scientific basis. Because by itself it does not contribute to the increase of medical scientific knowledge. So there are excellent doctors who know everything about the current medical science, but they are only medical practitioners because they don't feed back their experience into the medical scientific systems. So my closest friend in Zurich is one of those. He reads Nature and Science every week. He knows everything about the latest thing, goes to congresses, but he does not contribute at all to medical science, although he's highly informed about medical science. Okay. Note, however, there is an overlap area between medical science and medical practice that, however, does not destroy the distinction itself. So this is medical science, medical practice, and you have an overlap area here, and I show you how this overlap area is generated. The overlap area consists of actions that primarily belong to one area but have implications for the other area. For instance, when you have a medical treatment that is documented and fed back into the medical scientific system, then you have a practice, but that will become, to some degree, part of the medical scientific system. Or on the other hand, if you have clinical studies that are aimed for the medical system to find out about treatments and their effects, in which patients are treated with some medication. If the medication is effective, it's of course also a treatment of the patients. So this is an overlap area where from one area you get aspects of the other area. But that doesn't destroy, as I said, the principal distinction between these actions according to their aims. Now, in addition to medical practice that is science-based, there is not science-based medical practice, which comes in two basic types. And first of all, there is, in the West at least, the comparatively uncontroversial mainstream medical practice, mainly by medical doctors, especially by general practitioners, based on experience, not on scientific studies. So if you go in the West to a Western doctor, the first things that he's doing is not backed by scientific studies. Where he says, how are you doing today? So there's no medical study, no comparative study, whether that has an effect or not, whether the doctor asks you, how are you doing today, or something. So there are many, many practical steps that medical doctors do, they are not science-based, even in the principle science-based Western medicine. This is quite clear. So this sort of practice was the original target of the movement of evidence-based medicine that started in the 90s, especially in Canada. The practice should be transformed into a science-based practice. This was the basic idea of evidence-based medicine, which is a very, very important movement today in the Western tradition, in Western medicine. And the other type is what is called in the West complementary or alternative medicine, or CAN, and these directions are united by their opposition to current mainstream science-based medicine. So they see themselves either as complements or as alternatives to mainstream medicine. There are many different currents there in this area, and as I said, they are either complements or alternatives to mainstream medicine. So for instance, in the West, it's anthroposophic medicine, homeopathy, also traditional Chinese medicine, for instance, which is quite common. For instance, in Switzerland, you can go to many practices to practice traditional Chinese medicine, phytomedicine, and other kinds. There are many of these alternative movements. And their status is controversial, both within the medical profession and the general public, and they are handled very different in different countries, also with respect to coverage by health insurance. So in this country, of course, traditional Chinese medicine is widespread as far as I know. I don't know what its relationship is in this country exactly to Western medicine, so I can't speak about it now, but I can speak about one of the other areas, which I will do. Okay, now let's turn to medical science. In medical science, there are two basic types of medical science. One is basic science versus applied science. Okay, let me talk about this a little, because these terms may be misleading and are in need of explanation in general and also specifically in medicine. So, basic or fundamental science may be application-oriented, there are two types, or it may be curiosity-driven. And curiosity-driven means it's without any consideration of practical applications, like the gravitational wave research or radio astronomy. Radio astronomy, for instance, with this instrument, right? This is the nickname is Tianyan, and this is here, you know. And for my Western friends, this is the largest radio telescope in the world. It's 500 meters diameter. It was completed 2 years ago in China. It's a fantastic instrument, and that name, this means, as you probably know, this means here the heavenly eye. To the heavens, right? Now remember that, please, my Western friends. I ask you tomorrow. Okay, so this is science that has no application in view. This is just to explore the universe, and this is one of the most advanced instruments in the world. Well, it is the most advanced instrument in the world concerning radio astronomy. Now, in medicine, most basic research is application-oriented, or at least it is sold as such to the funding agencies. So I went to medical institutes and asked them what sort of research are you doing, and most of it is basic research you are doing, and most of it is really application-oriented, and that means they have some sort of application in view. I say more about it in a minute. It is based on, now, it is aimed at the basic understanding of medically relevant processes, so biochemistry, cell biology, and all that sort of stuff that you need in order to understand the process of diseases. So for instance, the cell biology of cancer. This is, you don't have a treatment immediately in mind, but of course you are interested in the cell biology because this is the basis for potential treatments then, later on. Now, applied science aims at knowledge that can be used for the solution of practical problems. In medicine, this seems to be mostly clinical research. When you make research, when you make clinical research, this term may be misleading. The term applied science may be misleading because it sounds as if it consists of the application of existing science, which is often not the case. It is applied in the sense that you have an aim for that sort of knowledge in view, but it does not mean that you simply apply basic science. This is just a misnomer that respected many people misunderstand, that that's an autonomous form of science, which is of course using basic science, but it's not absolutely dependent on it. So applied science in medicine is aimed at the development of medical knowledge that is applicable in medical practice. Therefore it's called applied science. And for instance, it's the development of a treatment against hepatitis D. There are many forms of several forms of hepatitis, and for some there exists treatment for hepatitis D, which is a rare form of hepatitis. There is no established treatment, and just now someone developed a experimental treatment against hepatitis B, and this is the sort then of applied science. Alright, now I give you the full picture about medicine now. So we have medical practice and we have medical science, and then medical practice has two main branches, the science-based branch and the not science-based branch, and then we have in the not science-based branch, we have the mainstream now concerning, of course, the Western medicine, the mainstream Western medicine. I don't know whether in China mainstream medicine is rather traditional Chinese medicine or not, I cannot judge that. But this means the Western perspective, and here in the CAM and the complementary and alternative medicine. In medical science, we have these two branches. One is applied science, clinical research, and the other is basic science, which is application oriented. And the relation between them is that the basic science, the application-oriented, supports the applied science. It's just supporting it. It's not just its application, but it's supporting applied science. And furthermore, then the applied science supports the science-based medical practice. So this is fundamentally the structure of medical science and medical practice. And of course, we have many controversies about that domain, mainly about complementary and alternative medicine, how good that is and what it is worth. Alright. Now I still have 2 hours left, so it's plenty of time. I quickly turn to homeopathy, and I explain you the basic principles of homeopathy. It was created by the German physician Samuel Hahnemann, who lived in the practice in the 18th and 19th century. And he became a medical doctor in 1779 and practiced thereafter. So he opened his practice, and Hahnemann gave up his practice after 5 years because he was afraid he would do more harm than good practicing the medicine of his day. Now you have to know that the Western medicine was a very strange practice in our eyes, up to the mid of the 19th century. So this is long before that turn. And medicine of that day, from the ancient times, consisted mainly of bloodletting, right, which is a very brutal sort of thing. You just release blood, or purging, which means inducing diarrhea or inducing vomiting. So the basic idea behind that comes from antiquity, Galen and other authors from antiquity. And the basic idea was that health is a state where some liquids are in some sort of equilibrium. And if the equilibrium is distorted due to the disease, then you restore equilibrium by letting out some of these liquids. So every way you can from your body to get liquids out, you did that. You know immediately, if you look at infectious diseases from what we know today, this is a treatment that's absolutely useless. Just the opposite. It's only doing harm to the patient because it weakens the patient. If you take away his blood, it'll induce vomiting. So for more than 2,000 years, this was the practice of Western medicine, and it is absolutely certain it was mostly doing harm and not doing any good at all. So this is the tradition of Western medicine, and that only changed in the mid-19th century when medical science became medicine became a medical science, and one author said that this is due to the application of systematicity. Then clinical medicine became a science, and before it was that sort of tradition. So if one criticizes alternative medicine, then one should have in view that the Western tradition has for more than 2,000 years a really very, very bad tradition, doing more harm than good to all the patients. So it was much better in these earlier times not to go to the doctor than go to the doctor. It's much more healthy not to go to the doctor. And Hahnemann realized that, so the motivation of Hahnemann is perfectly fine. That he said, I don't want to be part of that sort of practice because it's doing more harm than good. And Well, I said that already. Scientific clinical medicine only began to develop in the mid-19th century, including the acceptance of bacteria as infectious agents. We had this talk yesterday that what Koch did in the 1880s, that started a little earlier, 1870s, with the cell biology in the 1840s and 50s, and only then became medical science really scientific. And before it was all of that based on a very strange but understandable, intelligible ideas, philosophical ideas, but for the patients it was just a catastrophe. Now, it was known at Hahnemann's time that cinchona, the bark of a Peruvian tree, was effective against malaria. That was known as a treatment for malaria. But in self-experiments with cinchona, Hahnemann discovered that it induced malaria-like symptoms. So if you treat with that stuff, if you treat healthy people, then they get symptoms. This is what at least Hahnemann experienced. He got symptoms which looked like the malaria symptoms. And this became the basis of his doctrine, like cures like, or the principle of similarity. For my German friends, das Ähnlichkeitsprinzip. That was the basis of homeopathy. Therefore, the name homeopathy means treating with the same. Okay. In order to circumvent the toxicity of a substance, and this substance is also toxic, in order to circumvent the toxicity of the substance, Hahnemann diluted it, believing that this would preserve the substance's therapeutic properties. So you dilute it, you get rid of the toxicity, but you keep therapeutic practices. And he believed that these properties were spirit-like, Geist-like, which makes it, of course, if you look from today's point of view, that looks rather strange. But this is what Hahnemann believed, and at his time, this was perfectly okay to believe that, because this is the time where we still have vitalism and other things, and the materialistic thinking in Western scientific thought, biology, physiology, etc. That is a fruit of the second part of the 19th century. So at that time, this was perfectly okay to think about the healing properties in that way. Hahnemann later went to extreme dilution, say 10 to the minus 60 in the notation. This is called C30 or D60 in that notation, such that from today's point of view, not a single molecule of the original substance will be found in the end product. So which makes, of course, people today a little suspicious. Note, however, that in Hahnemann's time the notion of matter consisting of discrete units was not generally accepted. So at his time, this wasn't just obviously wrong or stupid. This was perfectly okay in his time. So one has to put it in the context of the time to see that Hahnemann in the beginning had a practice that was perfectly okay. So, and the idea in Hahnemann was if the dilution process is accompanied by shaking and striking the container on an elastic surface, the healing power of the substance is preserved. And this is what the homeopathists do until today. You know, they shake it and push it on a substance, and it looks very magical to us. This is what they're doing. And the combined process of shaking and diluting is called dynamization or potentiation by homeopaths. Okay. Now, two things deserve special mention. Hahnemann conducted experiments on healthy volunteers in order to determine the properties of various substances. He started with himself, right, using this cochina, and then did it in serial experiments, and that is what is called homeopathic proving or homöopathische Arzneimittelprüfung. That is practiced until today, and they think this is the basis of their practice. Although these provings superficially resemble clinical trials, they have three fundamental weaknesses. So they look very scientific, but they are not in the following sense. They only use subjective data recorded by the subjects. So you don't measure anything in the subject, but you just ask them, how did you feel the week after you got the medication? These are the data you are using. They did not use any controls, what is now in controlled trials in medicine the absolute standard. They did not use controls and described all recorded changes of subjects as effects of the used substance. So if someone got an illness within the first week, then that was ascribed to the substance because you did not use controls. So they had no real control about what the real effects of the treatment was. And they had massive problems concerning reproducibility, which is of course essential for scientific clinical medicine. All right. Second remark, in its first century of clinical application, say up to the end of the 19th century, homeopathy was probably vastly superior to its rival traditional medicine of that time. Because as I said, this traditional medicine of that time, Western, was really practically only doing harm to patients by weakening them, and had no causal effect, in most cases, restoring the health of the patients. And from today's point of view, and most homeopathic treatment has a placebo effect, I will come back to that, thus not harming patients, contrary to traditional medicine at the time, that by its brutal interventions massively harmed patients by weakening them. So one can say at the beginning of the history of homeopathy, this was a good move that probably saved many, many lives of patients who did not undergo the treatment. Now the question is whether homeopathy is a pseudoscience. And the question first is, of course, what is a pseudoscience? And roughly speaking, a pseudoscience is a doctrine that poses as science, but for some reason is not a science. And an example also in the Western tradition, I don't know how much that has influenced China so far, is creation science. Creation science is basically the biblical story, and it's sold as science. So it's a religious doctrine which is sold as science. So it ascribes itself to the status of science, scientific status, but is essentially a religious doctrine. And homeopathy resembles science, say physics, in having principles, you know, like the basic equations that we write down in quantum mechanics. So it has principles, namely the similarity principle for the treatment and also potentiation, that's the methodology, the principles of the methodology, and it seems to have empirical confirmation procedures for the consequences of the principles, namely the proving. I showed you that you do the proving procedure without the people. So it resembles really a science, it poses as science, but there are massive objections. The principles of homeopathy are not only disconnected from the rest of science, this is also partially true of physics, but they are in blatant contradiction with well-established scientific results. So if we have a materialistic point of view in medicine, and we have something, a treatment in which there's nothing of the original substance left, then you would assume that it can't have any effects at all. However, one shouldn't be too confident in purely theoretical arguments, as the history of science impressively teaches, and I know that Professor Carrier and I are here exactly on the same page, and we even had discussions with the enemies of homeopathy who believed that on theoretical grounds alone, they believed that one could discard homeopathy, and Professor Carrier and I really completely agree, no, you have in addition, have to have empirical proof for that. Because, for instance, as late as 1923, Bohr did not believe partially on theoretical grounds in light quanta, contra Einstein. You know, at late 23, the work by Einstein is from 1905 with light quanta. So that much later, he did not believe on theoretical grounds. So we should turn to the empirical side, and the empirical side here is there are countless randomized controlled trials. This is where you have patients, and you to take them into groups. One gets the treatment, the other one doesn't get no treatment, one alternative treatment, and then you compare the results. This is the gold standard in today's clinical medicine. And systematic reviews, which is meta-studies on these RCTs, and they have examined homeopathic treatments, none of which showed them to be superior to the placebo effect. And there are countless such studies. So there's a very interesting studies, you find it on the internet, by the Australian National Health and Medical Research Council of 2015. It has 57 systematic reviews. These are meta-studies to RCTs, and you have 176 RCTs, and there are 61 diseases and other health conditions investigated, and you find the report there. And not a single study of the serious studies is better than placebo treatment, so we can forget about it. Now, the point is that the intuitive statement that homeopathy is a pseudoscience seems to be obvious, but one would like to have that in a more systematic way, and we need a criterion of pseudoscience. Intuitively, one would judge homeopathy as pseudoscience, that's obvious, and it would be advantageous to have a criterion for distinguishing real science from pseudoscience. The most common criterion by philosopher Karl Popper is falsifiability. The scientific hypothesis must be in principle falsifiable. That's the demarcation criterion. And that means that there are empirical circumstances imaginable that contradict the hypothesis in question. Now, even a Nature article from '87 gets this criterion wrong. It's a little tricky, the falsifiability, so even Nature scientists didn't understand. But that's the secondary thing. The main thing is that according to this criterion, homeopathy is clearly not a science, pseudoscience, since it claims effectiveness, and effectiveness of pseudoscience of homeopathy is falsifiable, and is in fact falsified. So according to Popper, homeopathy is a falsified science. It's not a pseudoscience. And that is not the result that we want to have, really, because we have the feeling, no, that's a pseudoscience. And for reasons similar to the given one, Popper's criterion has fallen into disrepute with philosophers. They don't believe it anymore. And I've developed an alternative criterion on the basis of the so-called systematicity theory of science. And I explained that very quickly. Roughly speaking, systematicity theory claims that science is distinguished from other forms of knowledge by being more systematic in several dimensions. That's what the name. For instance, scientific explanations or tests are more systematic than everyday explanations or everyday tests. That's the basic idea. If you want to know more about it, you have to read 250 pages. But it's worth reading, I think. Okay. Now, systematicity theory claims that real science's progress consists in an increase of its overall systematicity. That's the main message concerning progress. And a typical pseudoscience competes with an established science, but has a much lower systematicity increase over time, often zero. That's the basic idea. A real science increases its systematicity, and a pseudoscience competing with it has no or very little increase. And homeopathy fits this criteria in none of the relevant dimensions. There is an increase of systematicity. If one looks at the last 20 years of homeopathy, they make no progress whatsoever. They're just defending themselves against this bad scientific medicine as they do. Here's my conclusion, and I almost keep time even. The case against homeopathy seems absolutely clear. And among those people who are even open-minded, medicine people who practiced earlier homeopathy and turned now to purely scientific medicine, the cases among those people who know something about this absolutely clear. Homeopathy is pseudoscience. However, a contemporary large fraction of patients, and also some medical doctors and influential institutions in Europe, believe in it. And there is much money that it goes in the billions. There are very difficult cases sometimes, especially when the medical practitioners have no really idea about scientific medicine, and they some of them try to cure cancer, and so the alternative medicine movement takes away patients from the scientific medicine domain, and then they do real harm because the patients don't get treated. So in 2009, Switzerland decided by public vote, it's a very funny form of democracy there, to include certain therapies, including homeopathy, in compulsory health insurance. So in Switzerland, that costs a lot of money. In Germany, and this is something where the group of people I work with in the medical profession, we find that in Germany in May 2018, so a couple of months ago, the German Medical Association, called Deutsche Ärztetag, decided to continue as part of additional advanced training of medical doctors, the training in what they call conservative treatment with homeopathic pharmaceuticals, according to the similarity principle. And this is in our eyes a catastrophe, because if the medical doctors accept that as part of their continuing education, then the patients get the feeling, well, this is accepted by scientific medicine, so it's a good practice, and therefore we should trust it. And this is really a catastrophe for the German medical system. And as I said, with a group of doctors and professors of medicine, we try to fight that. I have not looked into traditional Chinese medicine, so unfortunately I can't say something about that area that interests you most. I thank you very much.
rhetorical. Could you explain the similarity principle a little bit more?
Well, the similarity principle works like that. That you have a certain substance. You give it to someone who is healthy. Then that person shows certain effects. Then you look for a disease that has the similar effects that this treatment has. And then the theory is this substance is a treatment against the disease. So this is how he did it with this particular substance. On himself first, he took the substance, applied it to himself, and then he saw, oops, I am having malaria-like symptoms, therefore that treatment must be effective against malaria. That's the ideology. Well, it could be true. Unfortunately, in the case of malaria, when people tried to reproduce that, nobody could reproduce it. Healthy people. And that seems to be that Hahnemann had a very specific physiological condition reacting to that. And there you also see that the step of the generalization is very, very shaky. And they are not taking really care. They are also in the systematic probing of medicals. But the fundamental idea is this sort of similarity, which looks to us completely baseless. But you have to see that if you look at the older traditions, in the Western tradition, there is very much analogical thinking. You find that in astrology also, you find that also concerning colors of medication, that you say a medication that's red is something that is efficient on your blood, and something that's yellow and so on. These are the sort of analogical thinking and similarity thinking that is basic in ancient thought, and is probably also present in other cultures, and that's the basis for this analogical thinking. I don't know how that works in traditional Chinese medicine, but it may be there as well. So it's an ancient figure of thought which does not withstand scrutiny when we really do clinical research on it and look whether it's right. But it seems plausible somehow for some people.
I think that your big picture and two arrow goes, I like that picture, but that's good for probably for the modern science. However, medical and mathematics are the ancient science, and almost all the ancient medicine has drawn oncology, something like water, air, earth, something like that. But and the relation between the theory and the practice a little bit ambiguous. But I believe that when the doctor proposes the theories, it's based on their practice, and then it seems that they have a two-way direction. Although the relation is a little bit ambiguous and not so clear. So it's unlike the modern science. It's very strict. You have a very clear how to do the derivations. So, but I don't think it's good to say they are pseudoscience. They are a no-grade science.
Okay. I only spoke about homeopathy. I didn't speak about the others, which I cannot judge. Right? So I only speak about homeopathy. But the point is, in the Western tradition, it's very interesting. Although from Galen onward, from antiquity onward, until the mid-19th century, theory changed a lot, because from the 15th, 16th century on, there was some sort of medical science investigating the human body, and the circulation of blood was discovered, and many, many, many things. The fact is that medical practice in the Western tradition remained remarkably stable. Nothing influenced the practice of doctors. So that was decoupled. You are absolutely right, it's very ambiguous. But it was so that the practice, this purgatory practice, vomiting and all that, these brutal practices that really practically only do harm, they were stable until the mid-19th century. Even in the beginning of the 20th century, people still practiced. So it's absolutely right. tradition, this healing tradition, the medical tradition in the West, was independent of the theoretical science. And what I drew here was the situation that depicts the situation now in our times, and there's enough space, in principle, for the non-scientific practice. Whether it works or not is a different story, right? Whether it's pseudo-medicine and even harmful to the patient. So I have no judgment on traditional Chinese medicine because I don't know anything about it.
No one wants to ask a question, so let me ask the last one. So it's one thing to say it's a pseudoscience. The other thing is to say, does it hurt? Does it hurt still today? And nobody speaks about it, just vomiting, especially. But when homeopathy is usually placebos. And we know that standard medicine, biomedicine, has weaknesses in treating various diseases. Chronic back pain is top among this. So what is better if people suffering from such conditions go to such homeopathies and get some sugar, and feel better after this?
This is a very good question, and we discussed it in our circle controversially. This is exactly right, because on the one hand you can argue, well, it helps the patient, he believes it's because of the pill, but in truth it's placebo effect, so no harm is done. This is one of the factors, one fraction. And they say that, so if we doctors don't do it, then the patient would go away from us and would go to a sort of practitioner who has not a very good medical background, and he is possibly doing then more harm. This is one fraction. The other fraction says doctors who do not practice homeopathy, because they say we are practically undermining the relation of trust to our patients by lying to that practice. So the effect is, so to speak, a global idea. If we doctors support homeopathy in particular cases because it doesn't do harm and the patients demand it, then the large-scale harm is there is a large-scale harm because then these people are lied by the doctors, first of all, and they believe in other cases that possibly homeopathy as well. But as I tell you, it's really controversial, and I'm undecided. I don't really know, because on the one hand, it's really this argument. If that helps people for reasons they don't know, that's fine. But the question is whether that has long-term and side effects, intellectual long-term and side effects, that should be prevented. Therefore, the danger then is, of course, when the doctor says, look, I think homeopathy is pseudoscience, and it doesn't help you at all, that the patient says, thank you very much, goodbye, and I go to a medical practitioner. Right? And he does the treatment then, and then the patient says, oh, yes, and it helped, wonderful. What bad medicine is Western medicine, and how stupid are these Western doctors. So it's very ambivalent, and I can't make up my mind. So I see both sides, and we are also in the Minister circle where we discussed that we are divided. It's not clear. It's a very difficult problem.
Okay, thank you very much, Bob.